It's a little bit more official than.
Okay. Ready. Good evening. Welcome everybody to our special meeting of Council and Planning Commission. I want to welcome the Planning Commission members. Jeremy, please call the roll.
Angelou?
Here.
Bowers?
Here.
McGregor?
Here.
Padova?
Here.
Renner?
Here.
Schnetzer is absent. Weaver?
Here.
And then for Planning Commission, Shapaka? Here. Soriano is absent. Tamarkin?
Here.
Lester is absent. Greenberg?
Here.
Hicks?
Here.
Mako?
Here.
All right, thank you. Michael, do I turn it over to you, Mayor?
Well, we're going to arm wrestle over it.
Okay.
I'll start. Good evening, everyone. As you all know, I'm Mayor Laurie Jadwin. I just want to thank you very much for taking time out of your schedules to be here this evening. It is a typical Wednesday for our Planning Commission, so you're used to showing up here on a Wednesday evening. But certainly to have the opportunity to have our council members in the same room with Planning Commission, I think this is a really important time for everybody. I know everybody's time is valuable, and I appreciate the fact that you are prioritizing this because this really is a critical project for the city. Zoning code has a direct impact on our residents, on our businesses, and really on the future development of our city. It impacts everything from fences and setbacks to the land uses that we have going forward in the community. And as we know certainly from the past year, there have been projects that we wish maybe our zoning code had been a little bit more modernized and specific in terms of details. Our current code, I think you've heard me say before, and many of you already know, was written in the late 1950s. It is outdated, and it no longer reflects the vision or direction of our community, and it certainly does not speak to the future growth and vision of Gahanna that our residents have told us that they want and are continuing to tell us that they want. This project has been ongoing already for, is it 50 years now, Michael? 2 years? It's at least
It
2
may be somewhere in between 2 and 50.
It's been at least 2 years. And Michael can speak a little bit to what's been going on in those past 2 years. But it's been 2 years just to get to this point, and I think this is the most exciting part of the process, because this is the part of the process where we get to hear from Planning Commission, from council, from the members of our community. I know we have several folks here tonight, maybe folks watching online. This is one of several opportunities for public engagement that we have had and will continue to have as this zoning code project continues to evolve. So again, I just want to thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Director Blackford because this has been his baby for 2 years now. And Michael, I'll let you continue.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that very much. And again, thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedule. I think it's going to be well worth it. We're very fortunate tonight. We have our consultant, Mr. Sean Suter from ZoneCo. He's up from Cincinnati. He and his team, they have written a number of codes in this area, in this region, in the state, the country, and really international. He's has a unique background, former city attorney for Cincinnati, planning background. He speaks at a number of planning conferences nationwide. So we're very fortunate to have an expert in the field leading this effort. Before I turn it over to him, I'd like to introduce to my right our newest member of our planning team, Mr. Logan Stang. He is our manager of planning. His background, he came from us from a private planning firm, Planning Next, and he also has experience working in the city of Dublin. And then a couple seats over to my left, we have Maddie Kapka. She is our planner. She also has experience from the city of Dublin as well. So these two folks are instrumental in getting this document, along with Sean and myself, a document that reflects the city's vision and desire. So like the mayor said, we've been working on this project for a couple of years now. A lot of that is behind the scenes, a lot of effort. A zoning code is a legal document. Our current code is about 300 pages. There's a lot of work that has to go in kind of behind the scenes to look at that document, work on the formatting, looking at some of the regulations, doing some of the nitty-gritty things that need to be done before we go out and present a more finished product and having some of the discussions. So we've been having a number of engagements over the last couple of years, some online engagement, in-person engagement. Staff, again, has been working on that document on the language. We have a few topics we want to cover tonight, but before we do that, why are we updating the zoning code? Why is the zoning code important? How does that affect the city? And really, I've been with the city for about 9.5 years. And when I started here, that was something that was identified as a need. Again, the code is from 1958 is when it was originally written. There's been amendments throughout. I've taken a number of amendments before City Council and Planning Commission. But amendments only do so much. At some point, you need to take a step back. You need to look at that entire document. You need a document that reflects the vision of the city. And we've had a few initiatives here. One of them, Go for Gahanna. Some of you might recall that from, I think, 2015, 2016. That effort identified a few areas of zoning that might need a little lacking, need improvement, especially specifically with architecture. We've had a number of community feedback. That's something myself, Maddie, Logan, the whole entire planning department, we deal with folks, community members, whether they're residents or the business community on a daily basis, interacting with them. We try to keep track of the feedback that we have and make improvements to the code. So there's been a number of feedback from the community, and a lot of it is, and one of the most important things of the rewrite is, it's taking a 300-page document with basically no charts, no diagrams, and making that a little bit more digestible to subject matter experts, so our architects and our planners and engineers and attorneys, but also our residents and that small business owner as well. So really improving the formatting and clarity of the document. I think it's also very important that, Gahanna obviously was very different in 1958 when that zoning code was written than it is today. And I think the life cycle of a community, there's different pressure points, there's different things you're trying to accomplish, different things that maybe you're encouraging. In 1958, a very small community, it was growing. We really hit our stride in growth in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now today, where we're at, where we really have limited availability of land, that really puts a lot of pressure and emphasis, making sure our code is reflective of the types of uses that we want to see, those design elements, because again, we have to be more strategic and targeted because we have less availability. That puts more of an importance on developing those properties. Another initiative from 2019 was the land use plan. The land use plan is really a document that sets the tone for where the zoning code wants to go as far as uses, landscaping, signage, things of that nature. So the land use plan and consolidating all those various land use plans that the city had, very important when you're a growing community. You're looking at areas, but when you're kind of already peaked with your development, we have a comprehensive land use plan and getting some of those, again, those development standards and get those codified, because at the end of the day in Ohio, it's the zoning code that is law, not the land use plan. So again, we need to incorporate those recommendations from the land use plan in the zoning code. So really, at the end of the day, hopefully after the zoning code is approved, it's a document that provides clarity and direction to, again, our residents and our business community. The uses and design standards are more reflective of the vision that we have as a community. And really, the other thing is all that works hand in hand with economic development. And you can't just do one and not do the other. They all work together. One of the takeaways I had from a Ohio Economic Development Association, OEDA, meeting I was at several years ago is they had a survey of site selectors ranking the importance of various factors. And site selectors are those folks that those big corporations, those companies, the businesses, when they're looking at communities, they rank certain aspects for likelihood of where they want to go. And they ranked 9 different factors. And some of those, about half those factors aren't local controlled. They're, state incentives, state related things. But of anything that was locally controlled, ease of permitting was 4th out of 9th, and it was the second most important factor for site selectors when they're determining what community to go to. And ease of permitting does not mean no standards, do what you want. It's really providing clarity, removing, increasing predictability. So a zoning code that's reflective of a community's vision, that has processes identified. That's going to promote economic development as much as more than anything that a city does. Really, infrastructure was the number one, in case you're curious in that. So with that, that's a little bit of a background there of why we're doing this, what we're hoping to accomplish. We'll talk about a couple other things at the end, some of our next steps. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to the star of the show, Mr. Sean Suter.
That kind of introduction often. Thank you, Michael. Great to see everybody. I don't think we've ever met, really, all of us, and I've been working for you for a long time, so it's good to be together. I was telling Michael the other day that I remember sitting in the basement, and he was at home. We were talking on Zoom during the pandemic when we first started this effort, so we've come a long way since then. I think there have been a few things that have really happened since the 2019 land use plan that has been transformative for your community. One, for all of us, the pandemic, right? And the change and the shift in work patterns, commuting patterns, office space, the desire for live, work, all that kind of thing. That happened since we did our land use plan in 2019 and since we started this project. The other thing that's big is the Intel plant, right? So economic development, major project, not too far from you. The other thing I just read is the airport. Sounds like you're getting a new terminal, so that's only going to increase visitors to the Columbus area. And so lots going on, which is great to see. I'm Sean Suter, lead principal and founder of ZoneCo. We're based in Cincinnati, but as Michael said, we work all over the country, a lot of codes here in Central Ohio, and very pleased to be working with you on this project. I think he said to point to that one, right? Got it? Okay. Well said, Michael and Madam Mayor, about the reason we're here. It's all about the vision, right? In 2019 land use plan, you had this vision that was adopted, but then you have zoning regulations, as we talked about, that go back to 1958, and with an update in 82. Very different community, a subdivision ordinance from 1961. We're also looking at that as part of this project and putting it into a unified development ordinance. But you had a population of 2,500. This was an agrarian community back then, and it really became a suburban community, and now here we are. 2020, you had 36,000. You probably have even more than that now. So very different place. Why are we still using the same regulatory setup that we had in the 50s? That's the main question. You've identified that, and that's why we're doing this project. So nationally, you all are in line with a lot of the trends, things that your citizenry is looking for, are trends that are being seen throughout the country. Streamlining of administrative procedures and processes, that's a big one, right? So too many hearings, too many uncertainties, not enough clarity or consistency of process or procedures. And so streamlining those with more administrative approvals that can be made, that may not require a hearing. Every single variance may not require a full hearing for a minimal thing, things like that. Allowing more administrative decision-making will speed things up. But as Michael said very aptly, it doesn't mean you throw out all the standards and just give people what they want, right? You can still achieve high quality without a ton of cumbersome processes, and that's one thing that we're seeing across the country. Office to residential conversions, we talked about that a little bit. So, you don't have a ton of office space here, but you have some, and frankly, and you're in a pretty good spot as a suburban community. It's the downtowns that are really struggling to backfill office space. But you might have some of that. You might have some office space that isn't as economically viable as it was prior to the work from home trends we're seeing. And so what do we do with that? And that's a question that's really confronting every community around the country. And we also have a housing crisis. We all know that. Affordable housing crisis, lack of housing supply, and restrictive zoning regulations that frankly make it more difficult to build housing. So some of the office could be converted. Do we have regulations that are going to allow that to happen? So some of it's zoning and some of it's building code, and so sometimes you just can't get around that. But That we're seeing that all over the country. Reducing off-street parking minimums. That's probably the hottest topic in planning and has been for about 5 years. We're seeing communities across the country either eliminate their off-street parking minimums and let the market completely determine that, or reducing them, what I would call right-sizing them, which is tying them more so to something, demand or supply and demand, or tying it to something more specific than it was tied to in the past, which was essentially occupancy loads. Estimating occupancy loads, how many people per square feet in an office, and that's how you determined how many parking spaces you needed. That turned into probably more parking than most places needed by doing it that way. And so there are other ways we can do that to right-size it or eliminate it altogether, depending on your community's preference. Most places I work will say, we have a parking problem. We cannot eliminate it. People will build buildings with no parking, and then we'll be in trouble. Maybe, maybe not, but that's really within the community's call. A lot of times people will do parking studies to determine that and actually find out they have way more parking than people think. Usually it's kind of focused in certain parts of town, not one size fits all. And that's one of the things we're seeing also. One size fits all zoning, which is what Euclidean zoning is and has been, and what you have now, right, is just R1 here, R1 over there, R1 over here, is not contextual in any way. And so communities are moving towards more context-based zoning, special districts, things that are tied to or zones that are tied to the geography rather than just sort of this one-size-fits-all scheme. Accessory dwelling units, probably second hottest topic besides off-street parking minimums around the country. Everybody wants accessory dwelling units. I think there are a couple reasons for that. One, some people believe that that's going to help with the affordable housing problem. It's going to create supply. And I'm not sure about that. You'd have to build thousands of them, really, to achieve, to make a dent in the housing supply. To give you an example, the city of Portland, Oregon, which is, probably a place where ADUs are, proliferate, are a dime a dozen, they built 30 last year in the entire city. So, you're not going to see a ton of this. They're expensive generally, but it's a hot topic. It is also for aging in place, allows people to rent them out or also maybe have an elderly relative or someone living on the property. So there are multiple reasons why these are a good tool. I don't think it's going to solve the housing crisis, but it certainly can be a nice tool to have in your toolbox. And then housing type options, right? A diversity of housing choices. Most of our suburban codes were written for single family, quarter acre lot, 4-bedroom, 2-bath, American dream. And that may be the American dream still for many, many Americans, but for many other Americans, it's not the American dream. And so the question is, do we have a diversity of housing types? Are there stacked flats? Are there townhomes? Are there cottage courts? Are there, small lot homes? All kinds of different things is there senior housing in your community? All kinds of different housing types that allow people to stay, allow for your children to come back to the community and live after college because there's a place, an apartment development they might want to live in that's walkable. So a diversity of housing is going to help to attract and also maintain residents in a community, in a suburban community like Gahanna. And so we're seeing that all over the country. So those are some of the trends, nationwide, and you're seeing some of those same issues here. Okay. So we'll talk more specifically about Gahanna and our work here so far. The land use plan we talked about, one of the things that jumped out at me in the land use plan is the desire to promote infill development first. So instead of continuing to develop undeveloped land, which you don't have a ton of, or to annex and develop undeveloped land, was not the value of this community. The community said, hey, we want to promote infill first and fill in and add some intensity in areas first to create walkable nodes, that kind of thing. before we start sprawling out and building any more, low-density, drivable developments. So that was in your land use plan. Streamlining the development process was a theme. We've talked about that. In character guidelines, so you have this great Creekside district, which is sort of, I guess, the downtown now, right? It's your urban in the suburbs district, and it's very nice. And so, what kinds of those elements of that development are we going to carry forward into other developments around it or other parts of Gahanna? So that character guidelines were a big part of this, making sure that there are quality materials and quality design in your new developments, so it doesn't just look like cookie cutter anywhere USA kind of stuff. And then of course promote walkability. That's big. I mean, we're not getting rid of our cars. We know that obviously, but we do want the option, right, to have places to walk to. And walkability is defined in the planning world as leaving your front door and going into someone else's door. It's not just a walking path around a pond, right? I mean, that's nice for recreation, but walkability is I can go up and get a cup of coffee, or I can go to the post office, or I can walk to school. And those are things that many people want. It's healthy. And to the extent that we can promote that in our new development, our infill development, I think that'll serve Gahanna very well. Okay, so that was the land use plan in 2019, saying all the same stuff I think that we're still saying today. So we took a look at your zoning map and based on the land use plan, and the goal was really to modernize the zoning maps. So you always have to take a look and say, okay, what do we have here? Well, what you have here is kind of a menu, a large menu of zones based on very minimal distinctions, typically distinctions about density, essentially, or lot size. So we're going in to modernize the zoning map to reflect the Gahanna of today, not the Gahanna of 50 years ago. Reducing nonconformities for existing buildings, that's another goal of ours. We don't want to change things to create a bunch of nonconforming uses. That's no good, because you go to refinance and your lender says, it doesn't meet the zoning. You say, wait, you don't have to go through that, right? So we're very mindful of that as we work through these revisions to the code. Removing and consolidating and simplifying the zoning districts that no longer support Gahanna's needs. So if there are regulations on the books that aren't promoting the vision, or we can consolidate to make things simpler, that's one thing we're looking at doing. Simplifying the zoning maps and text for ease of understanding and use and administration. Very important. You shouldn't need a lawyer. I am a lawyer, but you shouldn't need a lawyer to sift through your zoning code. You should be able to say, well, I want to put an addition on my house. Let me go online and see what the city lets me do, or call Michael and all his staff and take up their time, right? It should be simple enough that you should be able to figure that out. And save the tough questions, make them earn their money on the tough questions, not the easy stuff, like can I put a deck on? And that should help everybody. Like I said, you shouldn't need to pay a professional to know how to do certain things with your property. So currently there are 27 zoning districts in Gahanna. Like I said, many only with minor variations around permitted uses and dimensional standards. So as we looked at them and compared them, we're like, well, why do we have all of these, different variations of residential district? 8 residential districts. I mean, you only have 35,000 people, so it's like you have essentially one zoning district for every 1,500 people. That's a lot. It's not necessary. And if you look around, I always look at communities, and if you just drive around or you look at an aerial photograph, and you're like, what are the different development patterns really in my city? There aren't 27. Things are, pretty standard stuff. And I don't think you could even find 27 different development patterns if you looked at it. So that's kind of how I look at it and say, let's simplify this based on not only what's on the ground, but the kind of development that we envision. 8 commercial districts, including an office district. Again, single-use zoning is what I like to call a 20th century American experiment. Never in the history of humanity have we lived in single-use places. Why? Well, now we can get between single-use places very easily, right? But most of humanity, we've lived in places we can walk or live where we work, that kind of thing. So, to have single-use zoning is kind of inefficient, I would say, and not all, right? But like, especially in the commercial districts, mixing up those uses, allowing people to live where they work, that kind of thing, is what people are looking for. Look at Creekside, for example, right? 6 planned mixed-use districts, 1 institutional district, 1 planned industrial, 2 overlays, and then you have your old Gahanna district. The old Gahanna district is a geographic-based, place-based district, so it is unique, and I think that is fantastic that you have that, because that's the only place in Gahanna that has that development pattern, so let's regulate it as its own thing. And any other places that have those kinds of unique development patterns, we can also try to regulate in a unique way. But that's your main, that's your downtown, if you will. I think there we go. Jumped ahead. So the proposed zoning map, we've been working through this with Michael and his team for a long time now, working through, do we create new districts? Do we eliminate some districts? Do we consolidate? And what we came up with were 5 residential districts. You're going to have your large lot district still, and then sort of a medium, small, and one that's going to allow attached single family, like a townhouse, that kind of thing. And then, of course, one that's going to allow for stacked flats, multi-unit development. 3 commercial districts, and they do include office. 1 institutional district to maintain what we have. 1 manufacturing, which is the light manufacturing district in the area where you have that. A recreational district, which I think is going to be really good because you have some great recreation areas here. Creekside mixed use and residential, that's your Creekside district, and then a limited overlay district. And we'll show you in more detail what these are, but this is just an example of how we got to 14. So we shed 13 unnecessary districts, which I think is pretty great. And these track the focus areas pretty closely, I would say, in your land use plan. The land use plan put out all these focus areas and said, these are the places where we need new zoning districts or where we need to focus, obviously, and so this tracks that pretty well. And you want to tie it back into your plan as much as you can. Of course, things have changed since then, so it might not be exactly 100% in alignment, but for the most part, we're using that as a guiding document. You worked hard on it and adopted it. A lot of good. I wanted to put this picture up here because these are the kinds of engagement exercises that your great staff have undertaken. I think if Michael's given you a briefing on all the engagement that they've done, it's been really impressive. Meeting people where they are at events, getting out into the community, and that's just the best way to engage with your citizens. Formal processes and inviting people here to town hall, city hall is great, but really you get a lot more people if you're out with a lot of people in an event or whatnot. So they've done a great job, and you can see, these are a lot of times visual preference surveys. When we first did this, started this code, we did a visual preference survey, because we were in COVID time, so we couldn't get out really. So we put out this survey, and it was like, do you like this? Do you like that? And it was really enlightening and has informed our code, as does this on the ground in-person engagement. So there's been a lot of preference on commercial building types and uses in particular. What staff has found is that residents generally prefer mixed use and smaller scale commercial building types in Gahanna. And that I think is reflected in your Creekside district and in other developments that you've done over the years, even here along Hamilton, which is, developments up to the street, parking behind, at least some pedestrian orientation, especially around the schools up here, where kids walk, go to lunch, et cetera. So it seems, based on our feedback, that's what people in Gahanna are looking for. And less auto-oriented uses like gas stations, drive-through, and strip malls. You're right off the interstate, so you have some of that, and that was what the market demanded along that corridor, because it was drivable corridor, and you're still going to have that. The question is, the new stuff, infill development, do we want to create more of it? Or as we redevelop some of that, what do we want that to look like? And it sounds like, if we're going to redevelop a strip mall, instead of putting another strip mall back in with a gas station, the people are saying, hey, let's create something interesting here. Let's create a walkable place out of this. So that's what we're trying to code for as much as we can. So residential zoning districts, there are, like I said, 5 of them proposed, where there were 8. And again, you're going to have your estate residential district, single unit, 1 acre minimum lot size, and that reflects, an area of your community, and we'll maintain that. An R1 large lot, that's a ½ acre lot size. And you have some of that. You can see we put the colors around the box and given you an idea. It might be a little hard to see of the development pattern within the box, and then the color correlates to the zoning map. So you can see that there's some bright yellow areas of ½ acre lots, pale yellow areas of 1 acre lots, not too many, but along the edges there, mostly to the east. And then a medium lot would be a 9,000 square foot lot size. That's a little smaller than a ½ acre. And that's R2 medium lot, and you can see that sort of in the what is that, orangey color, like brighter orange. And then the duller orange would be a small lot residential, 6,000 square feet. And that's one thing that you all have heard from your community is, 6,000 square feet is a pretty small lot. It's not a tiny urban 1920s lot, but it's pretty small in today's standards, right? And so you're probably going to have more of a traditional neighborhood development on a lot like that. But also that's more efficient. You get more housing, costs less to build the housing because the infrastructure is less. And then multi-unit residences with an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size. So you could put a multi-unit on a less than a ½ acre lot. That's your missing middle housing, if you've heard that term. That's been another hot topic is, how do we create the kind of small scale multi-unit or attached housing that we had very prominently really after World War II when we needed housing desperately. And there was a baby boom and all that sort of thing. And you see that around these parts and across Ohio where you had 4 families, 3 families, 2 families, up to 6 units. But in neighborhoods, multi-unit housing back then wasn't just huge garden-style apartments on 20 acres, right? It was woven into the fabric of your community, and we could still do that. And that's what that zone would be. That's a minimum. Now, you could have a much larger lot and do a larger development on it, but that gets you in a pretty small lot. You could do a 2, 3, 4 family on something like that. So I think that's pretty cool. It gives people options for different types of housing. On the commercial side, 3 districts. You have an office and institutional district. That's in the blue, the light blue. And you can see there isn't a ton of that either, but there's some of it. And some of that's traditional sort of office, park-like development. The neighborhood commercial district, which I think is really, really interesting. So you have different, we're responding to the development patterns that you have here. And so you do have a corridor, a couple corridors actually, and that's going to be corridor commercial. That's going to be mostly drivable. That's going to be the bigger shopping centers, grocery stores, that kind of thing. And so there is some of that you can see along the main arteries. But the neighborhood commercial is I think, really interesting because that's the kind of development that is woven into the fabric of your residential neighborhoods along the main streets, not in the middle of a neighborhood, but along the main streets where it draws from that neighborhood, where you could walk to it or drive to it, depending. And so I think that's really interesting. You can see that in the light pink, and it sort of surrounds some of the corridors. Okay. And that's going to be smaller type uses. You know, the neighborhood stuff is going to be the hair salon, the art gallery, the little restaurant, personal services, that kind of stuff, doctor's office. Okay. And then all other zoning districts, we have the what does that say? Restricted institutional, right? The RI. That's where you're talking about schools, religious assembly, public administration, public parks, those kinds of things. Got to have that. You can see some of those big parcels with that on it, and those, are going to be maintained. IM, the innovation and manufacturing, that's a large area down in the southeast there, and so that's a South Gateway focus area generally. And then you have the recreation and conservation and the creek side and some other parts of the community. Important because that was one of the land use goals too, was to conserve some green space and your natural features. So hopefully that simplifies. We couldn't fit, because the zoning map you currently have is the format of it and how many zones. It didn't work to put them side by side, but maybe at some point we'll get that so you can see what's changed and that it's actually simpler, I hope. And then there are the Creekside districts, right? The piece that's really your most special district or your most unique district. You have the Creekside mixed use area, and then the residential that surrounds it, sort of the traditional historic part of Gahanna. And we're really looking at promoting high-quality pedestrian-oriented design. And this is where the focus of the character regulations and standards are going to be. Making sure that what happens around and in that district is compatible with the type of character that the community envisions. So let's talk about that for a second, and then after we get through this, obviously purpose of the work session is not to hear me talk the whole time. I know I'm going on and on, but is to really just hear from you. We're not at the point yet where we're diving through the draft. We'll get there. This is still pretty high level, but just to kind of get everybody thinking about this and understanding our approach, and then we can dive into the details. The Creekside design regulations. Again, promoting the unique character of the downtown, the mixed-use district, and adding in design standards. These are all the different types of design standards that you could add in. I'm not saying we're adding all these in, but things that we see in other places if you're trying to control specifically for a certain character or design. Architectural features, the building frontage, making sure you don't have blank walls, making sure you have transparency, the entrances are prominent, et cetera. Materials and color, you can go down that path if you want. We talked windows, lighting, building entrance location, awnings and canopies, signs, parking location, outdoor storage, and curb cuts. All of those things will determine the character, the walkability, and the usability of a place. So just to give you some examples, as we're looking at Creekside, and we did a visual preference survey primarily around the Creekside district when we did it, colors and materials and all these features and elements. So variation in height and roof elements. One thing you see a lot, especially in a place like Greater Columbus where there is a huge demand for housing, is you're going to see the box, the square box. And it's going to pop up everywhere because it's like a kit. And that's what Wall Street likes to finance, so to be blunt. But you don't have that, right? You have a place that has more architectural interest, I would say. This was, I think, designed very well. There are, as you can see, different height elements, facade articulation, articulation of wall planes, windows and openings to create rhythm to the building facades. You see those. Those are all important elements you probably don't think about on a daily basis, but you walk by and you're like, oh, I really like this place. All of that actually visually impacts how we think of a place. Now think about that versus just a big monolithic box. That, you know, some might say it's fine, but I think, you know, these kinds of character elements are going to give a place a look and a feel that at least Gahanna is looking to have. So ground floor features like a mix of ground floor use. It doesn't have to all be retail. You can do all kinds of different services, retail, office. In some places, people are even putting in residential units. High transparency into commercial businesses. You obviously want to be able to see through. So how much tint can you have on a window? I mean, things that, again, may not even think about, but you want to be able to see that merchandise, and the merchant wants you to see it. So awning, consistent awning designs, sign standards, lighting standards, all of those kind of things make a place interesting. You know, materials and color. One thing you've got a lot of in the Creekside is brick and stone, and those are natural materials. And there's just something about natural materials, right? It just feels more permanent. And, you know, it's not always easy to do, but there are ways to combine that with synthetic materials if you're trying to cut costs, but at least on the ground level and whatnot, trying to create a permanence of a base. And you've done a good job at Creekside, and the developer did a good job of using various elements, natural elements. Again, you know, you can get into colors if you want. Your Creekside district, if you're using natural color or materials, you're going to be using a lot of, you know, muted browns, tans, whites, those kinds of things. But it could be, you know, that's really up to you if you want to get into that. And then building access. This is really an important part. So, you know, requiring pronounced building entrances along the front of the building to, you know, attract pedestrians. So is it a pedestrian-oriented building or a vehicular-oriented building? Sometimes you have to do both, like this building, right? There's only one way to get in, and you just got to do it, and you got to make it as nice as you possibly can, and try to make sure that pedestrians, there isn't too much of a pedestrian-auto conflict, which I think they've done a good job with, changing the sidewalk pattern there. That helps. You can see this is accessible as well. You've got to have that. So all kinds of design elements that make a place walkable and enjoyable. Signage. I know this is a hot topic, right? So this is something we've been working with communities around the country on as well. How do we create a menu of signs that allow for businesses to get what they need, which is visibility, because they can't thrive without that, and also gives the community what they're looking for, which are aesthetic protections. You know, and boy, when you start working on sign ordinances, I mean, it is detailed. There are a million different variables, from lighting to type of sign to base to materials on the sign, material on the base, location. It just goes on and on and on. But it's important stuff because it really impacts not only the safety, public safety, but in Ohio, the Supreme Court has upheld aesthetic considerations as well. So it's not just safety, it's also, you know, aesthetics, which, you know, there's no harm in that. So the signage regulations, again, improving safety and limit risk of accidents or injury, minimize the risk caused by hazardous signs, achieve uniformity and balance in the size, number, and placement of signs. You know, you can only really regulate, you know, the dimensions and the location, really, and the lighting of a sign. Obviously, you can't regulate content. Enhances the aesthetics of the city, Temporary signage is a huge issue. That's something that, we're working on your code because that's changed since 2015 or 16 with the Reed case. You can no longer distinguish signs like real estate sign here, political sign here, or this type of sign here. You can't do that. It's just temporary sign. Here's where it can go. Here's how many you can have. Here's what the materials can be. That's it. So we have to update the ordinance for that, and obviously protect the public's First Amendment rights while also minding the aesthetics and the safety. Not always an easy balance, but I think we have a pretty good formula for it that's been upheld. Types of signs permitted in different zoning districts. So we create this menu of signs, like here are the 6 or 7 sign types that we allow in Gahanna. Here's where they're allowed by district or use. And then, here are the materials that are allowed. Here's the size. Here's the lighting that's allowed on that sign. All those things come together to create hopefully attractive and safe signage. Again, staff has done engagement around visual preference for signs. I think, Michael, you said the least favored sign is the electronic sign. So people tend to like, I say this, people, generalizing, but what we see is generally people like pedestrian-oriented signs in pedestrian areas, meaning, a projecting sign over a sidewalk, even sandwich boards sometimes on the sidewalks are fine. But, pedestrian scale signs in pedestrian areas, auto-oriented signs in auto areas, but attractive ones. Pole signs are out of fashion. Nobody I've worked with in the last 10 years is putting pole signs back in their code. They're eliminating pole signs altogether and focusing on monument signs or wall signs or a combination. But again, for many years, we really didn't calibrate sign standards to what we were trying to accomplish or the character of the area. So now we're tying, scale, pedestrian scale, signage, and auto-oriented signage at a different scale. Okay, we're getting to the end here, don't worry. And that's an example of permanent signs, and then you have obviously your temporary signs. And there's always a new type of sign popping up somewhere, a new sign technology popping up somewhere. You can't blame the sign industry, that's how they make a living. But what we can do is try to make it as attractive as possible and allow those signs that fit in with this community and its vision. A lot of flags popping up different places. A lot of times it blocks view from your car. It could block views from pedestrians. It's just ugly. Well, that's my opinion on that. All right, so that is just kind of a general overview of everything we've been looking at. I know it's a lot, but I'd love to hear your reactions, your thoughts, and get some feedback. And then I don't know what the schedule is, Michael, but soon we'll be providing a draft, and that's when everybody can start digging into the fine details.
Correct.
Okay.
Here's. Oh.
Well, thank you for staying awake and your attention.
Questions to be posed or?
Correct, you were opening it up.
Opening it up to questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, sir.
Question, our current code is now 65 years old. What do you see as the length of time that this next code is going to be in place, with the caveats that Intel's coming, the airport's changing, we're going to have 500,000 more people here in 50 years? That's going to change Gahanna. Gahanna changed over those 65 years. I suspect it's going to change a lot faster now.
I think you're probably right. And that'll have to do with land values, right? Increasing along with supply, or I'm sorry, along with demand. So there will be a lot of pressure on this community. And how long a zoning code should last is really as long as the plan that it implements is in effect. Now, in Ohio, we have, depending on your perspective, the disadvantage or the advantage of there's no state requirement that you have a comprehensive plan at all, which is very unusual. But there's a very home rule focused state, which has its benefits too. But in many communities, in many states, you have a requirement to update every 5 or 10 years. And as you do that, those places still don't update their zoning codes. It doesn't matter. But best practice would be to say, okay, the 2019 land use plan, let's say you do an updated one, which you really probably should pretty soon here, after you get the zoning code rewritten, is do an updated land use plan because, like you said, the world has changed significantly since 2015. So say you do that in, I don't know, 2026 or something. That's 5, or 2024, 2026, that's 7 years, 6 years at that point. I would say you should be looking at your zoning code annually. And you're already doing that, right? That's where these amendments are coming in a lot. But that's piecemeal. And the problem with piecemeal is what you'll end up doing, like most communities, if you're not, it's a great question, because if you're not minding the zoning code and keeping it current, what'll happen is you'll start responding to the issue du jour, like you have been for the last 40 years. And someone will come in and say, you know, oh my God, this land's so valuable. I'm right next to Intel and I want to do a 50-story building, or let's just say it's not going to happen, but and you're going to go in and say no buildings over 35 feet or something like that to react to it, and then all of a sudden you're going to have this mishmash of regulations that aren't reflective of anything except reaction, right, to things. So you want to be proactive, just like with your planning, with your zoning code, and it can't hurt to take a read through it every year or two and say, oh yeah, this no longer is reflecting what we're doing. And going back to Michael and saying, hey, here are a few things we want to change. It does take staff time, it takes political will, it takes community engagement, and that's all not easy. But we definitely don't want it to go 50 more years. That would be bad. Yes, sir.
What value is there, or what reason would there be to retain an estate residential zone? And I have 3 kind of reasons for that question. Since I've been on planning commission, we've never heard an application to rezone to an estate residential zone. Second, the existing parcels that are estate residential, if they come before us, it's usually to rezone to something more dense or a more dense use. And the only reason I could think of is I believe in our code, if property is annexed in, it automatically is identified as an estate residential. So the question
Right.
is, what value is there to retain an estate residential?
That's part of it, to have a zone for the annexation. That is definitely part of it. We talked about that. The other part of it is just to, I think, essentially keep from further subdividing some of these, right, until they come in with a specific maybe proposal like they have been. So if we go ahead and rezone it now, you're gonna get whatever we rezone it to, and that may not be a bad thing, but it's definitely a change in the character of those large lot areas. No right or wrong answer to that one. It's more of a policy choice, I think. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I'm keep looking this way. Yes.
So if we whittle down the number of residential zoning districts, do we, and I guess this is just based on your experience, and maybe there's some practicality with what we're trying to do here, but do you see a lot of nonconformities being created by doing that, or when you go in there and we whittle these down, you take into account the current setbacks, and you just not create a whole mess by
Yes.
excuse me, by rezoning these residential districts?
Yes, and we do an analysis of that to make sure we're not creating a bunch of nonconformities and messing up people's financing. You will create some, And that's okay if you're really trying to change, the development pattern of a place, but you don't want to do that in your single-family areas. You want to generally maintain those. So when we recalibrate the new districts, we're mindful of that. Yes, sir.
I'll
Yeah.
just add really quickly that
Yeah.
from staff's perspective, part of the evaluation we're doing right now is like scenario testing for a lot of these to make sure that we're gonna reduce as many of those nonconformities as we can. So that's one of the things that we actually had about a 3.5 hour discussion this morning about different areas of the city and just trying to make sure. So that is something that we're going through that process as well, because we want to try and minimize as much as possible. So apologies.
So I don't know, so this question that I have, it's not really with what you showed up here, but it sort of does. So I see parking as largely a mobility issue. And one of the things that, you didn't have any examples about mobility, transportation. And that really dovetails into everything, especially when we're talking about infill, when we're talking about redesigning the center, the Creekside area and all that kind of stuff. You did bring it up a little bit on the parking, but I'm probably one of those odd Ohioans that get rid of parking and solve your mobility issue. But you have any comments on that?
And by mobility, you mean your transportation options, whether it be
Yeah,
bus,
exactly.
rapid transit,
We have
bus,
walking,
yeah.
we have bicycle, we have cars. Well, there's a lot, especially today, there's a lot of differentiation, with all of that, right? So,
So from the zoning and land use side of that, well, there's two things. One would be your subdivision ordinance, right? So if you're creating a new subdivision, making sure there are connections to other sidewalks and other roadways, that it's not just a bunch of cul-de-sacs that leave you stranded. That can be done fairly easily in your subdivision regs. In your zoning regs, we only have jurisdiction right up to the street. Michael doesn't have, and I don't have any say in what goes on the pavement, really. That's your transportation department, state transportation department. But what we can do, though, is create environments around that promote walkability, that promote pedestrian activity, that are dense enough in certain places that it's going to support the different transportation methods that you're looking at. I believe BRT is either coming through or nearby somewhere. Is that right? Yeah, and you have, maybe bus line, you have that, multimodal. We could require new developments to connect to bike trails or bike lanes. There are a lot of ways we can do that on the private realm to help promote those things in the public realm, but we can't, unfortunately, do much. Be great to right-size the streets and all that sort of thing and the intersections, but those are going to stay, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Land use zoning code, 2,500 people to 36,000 people. What you're presenting, is it going to take us from 36,000 to 50,000 residents? Or is it going to maintain where we're at now? What is this promoting, this new code?
Well, I think most of your community is built out, right? And like most suburban communities everywhere in the country, the majority of the land use is single family. That's not going anywhere. That's not going to change. It's those areas of opportunity in those along your corridors, or in areas where maybe you have a single-use shopping center that turns over. What do we do there? Yes, it will promote more intensity in those places, which might add to the population. Hard to tell exactly, what the demand's going to be, but we are definitely promoting, I think, more supply in the community. Like I said, a diversity of supply. This isn't high-rises and, stuff like that. The height limits are still going to be pretty low, 3-story for the most part. It's going to be in character with what you have. But where there might be now, a huge parking lot, why not create those housing opportunities? Because you're going to have demand, I think. Whether it gets to 50,000, I don't know. I don't know about that. But I think you're on a growth trajectory.
Yeah, I would add that, yeah, I echo what Sean said, where I think, because I think the land use plan, like 60% of the actual land use of the city is residential, single-family residential. Those areas really aren't changing. We're not proposing, other than, streamlining the number of zonings. It's not really incorporating any new uses in those areas. And so when we're talking about additional residential opportunities, it would be incorporating, maybe some multifamily kind of options in these areas that we've seen that are maybe vacant, and like I said, like large parking lots or office buildings that just don't seem to be likely to come back. So I think there's going to be spots of redevelopment, probably on those major corridors, like Sean was saying, Hamilton Road, maybe Johnstown Road. It's not going to be in existing areas, because really those uses are not changing whatsoever. I think where we're going to see the majority of zoning code changes for uses are really on those major roadways.
In the focus areas in your
Yes.
plan.
Yep.
So is there a number out there? I mean, 10,000 more residents for Gahanna? I mean, somebody had to come up with a number with a density with the land that we have. You would be projecting something.
Don't have that kind of analysis, but I would say it would be much smaller than that, because it's such a small percentage of properties that would have additional residential opportunities for development.
I think that goes over what Stephen was saying, that, so we got an established community. Let's make the community better by getting the circulation between the known community or areas and districts a little bit better, because we're not going to double in size. The quality of the life here in Gahanna should rise with what we're doing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an epic fail on my part if that doesn't happen as part of this zoning code update. So absolutely.
Certainly don't want it to go the other way.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I think this question sort of dovetails right on this topic and question that Mr. Shapaka asked. What, if any, consideration was there for municipal funding realities that's baked into your proposal?
You have to turn that to Michael on that.
I'm not sure I understand the
Capacity.
municipal funding realities. I'm not, are we talking about like property tax, income tax generation? And I think that's, thank you, a very good question. So I think when we're looking at that, and like I was saying a little bit earlier, where zoning and permitting relates and affects your tax base. And I think what we're trying to do is promote redevelopment in areas that the city, whether it's the community, has indicated as an appropriate area for redevelopment. When you redevelop, that's going to increase whether it's the job base and the property tax. So it's being more strategic and looking at what uses would achieve that goal in those focus areas. So on our major corridors, what are those activities that would promote those things that we are trying to achieve? And we can do a deeper dive when we get into public hearings and show you where we were at and where we were going as to how we're accomplishing that. Because you don't obviously want to go in a totally opposite direction. That's going to, hamstring the city in the future. So we're very mindful of that with looking at, especially I would say the area of our current zoning code that I think is most lacking is really looking at that. There's very little variety in those commercial zones, and there's a lot of uses that are allowed by right. When you allow something by right, you're really promoting them, and they don't really achieve some of those things that we're trying to achieve. So we're trying to be more mindful of that and a little bit much more strategic into what those are today. Because what it was in 1958 or when we updated it, maybe periodically throughout the decades, those change as a community. So I think that's something that we're going to look at, and what I envision is and maybe like Sean said, it's going to be tough to do, but kind of showing a zoning map and maybe talking about that and how we went from this very open-ended. I think I've been before you all and said it's almost impossible to put a number on the amount of uses allowed. It really is in the hundreds or thousands in some zonings, and narrow that down to what's appropriate and what's beneficial from a compatibility standpoint, and then from a financial standpoint, setting up the health of the city.
As we always say, parking spaces don't produce tax revenue. And so, you know, they may be necessary, but empty parking spaces, you
not a
need
good look. It
occupied
doesn't benefit
spaces, you
anyone.
need people, and that will help drive your revenue. Yes?
In your experience across the country, is there anything in our code or our plan that you've seen that's innovative that we should consider that we don't have?
Ooh, well, there are a lot of things. I think, you know, we talked about the trends, right, going on around the country. So I think you could right-size your off-street parking minimums. You know, and we can take a look at that. You could eliminate them if you really wanted to, but most places probably don't in suburban communities. Yes, sir.
If you're done with that, I have a follow-up.
Yeah. So there's that. I think accessory dwelling units is a hot one too, that you could add some
Can you
housing
explain
choice.
what that is?
That is, they used to call them granny flats. It's the above the garage, the carriage house, whatnot above the garage in the back, or a part of your house that has a separate entrance, and that can allow for your kids to live there, your mother-in-law, father-in-law to live there. The thing that people don't like about them is they become rental in some communities, rental units. So there are ways to regulate that, to say, look, you have to have an owner-occupied person living there or a relative, blah, blah, blah. So those are the kind of things. But generally speaking, your code is fairly typical. Like I said, the Creekside District was innovative when it was done, and it still is in a lot of ways. The rest of it is a fairly straightforward, common Euclidean zoning that you find everywhere in Ohio and the United States.
Can I just
Yes.
get clarification just on that last point? If ADUs are a hot topic.
Yes.
And controversial. Is it my understanding that we can restrict rental use of ADUs if we were to allow ADUs?
Yeah, you can require owner occupancy. Yes.
Or like familial, or like,
Yes. I don't see why you couldn't. I mean, you'd have to get a legal opinion on that from your law director, but I'm not seeing any issues with that.
That was exactly it. There had to
Yeah.
be an immediate family member and that, so we could double check that.
Yeah,
but-
that's mostly what we're
Yeah.
seeing. They're also requiring, making sure there's off-street parking, so you're not loading the streets up with cars, that you have space for them. There's setback and screening. That's the other thing, I've got my pool and my beautiful patio in the backyard, and now somebody built a residential unit right next to it, and they're staring into my pool. It's like, wait a minute, where did my privacy go? So there are things like that, setbacks, height restrictions, where you can place windows maybe, screening, all that kind of stuff that goes into it. There's a lot that goes into the ADU. It does provide some flexibility. We always use the example, it doesn't have to be detached either, it could be within the house. We always use the example of aging in place. So let's say you've lived in the house for 40 years, 50 years, and you bought the house for 50 grand, and it's now worth 500,000 or whatever. The taxes are high, and you might be on a fixed income. What's wrong with having something like that to rent to someone, right? And to help you stay in that home, to maintain it. So there are a lot of arguments for it. There are a lot of arguments against it. But it's like anything, you've got to find that right balance for Gahanna. I'm not big on just shoving things at you or giving you cut and paste stuff from other communities. The work we do is really custom tailored. I always say we could make a lot more money if I just cut and paste. But we really do try to tailor it to get that right balance for you all. Because we want you to be happy with it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Mr. Suter, for being here. Appreciate the presentation and appreciate you coming. Piggybacking off of Mr. Greenberg's question in terms of trends and hot topics. In your work with other communities, have you seen any efforts towards incorporating sustainability practices, whether, I know you mentioned some of the natural materials, but also, you know, if that's greenery and trees, trees always seem to come up with a variance. You know, what are you seeing, and what is that going to be reflected in our proposed code?
Yeah, so the main item around that is with stormwater runoff, and it's usually putting a maximum on a lot for impervious surfaces and lot coverage. So, you know, that's definitely something that we have in this code is lot coverage, you know, maximums, and that we see around the country. That's for stormwater runoff, and we know that's really important. Other things are open space requirements or softscaping, landscaping minimums on lots. Also allowing for things like solar panels. And that's actually pretty controversial in a lot of places because some people don't like the look of them. So, you know, but you can only put them in one place, right, to get the sun. But some people don't like them. So, but that can be something that can help. Buffers from streams and other natural features. Clustering of subdivisions, cluster subdivisions around natural features, smaller lots. Clustered around naturals. You can get more lots in. It's kind of a benefit for the developer, but you're also at the same time conserving the green space. You know, requirements for developments to provide open space or civics type spaces. You can't necessarily require them to give the city property, but you can require them to create, you know, recreation and green space areas. So there are a lot of things, yeah. I think, you know, just connectivity. You know, we used to do everything by PUD, right? And there are these islands that were disconnected. And now we're not looking at one track in one development as its own island. We're trying to figure out how does it all connect together? And how does it impact, you know, the whole community?
The one thing that I'll add to that is that sustainability has been a big topic in the land use plan and some of the other items. And so, you know, from a use standpoint, renewable energy, like Sean said, like that's being put in there, you know, smaller scales for both residential and commercial. How can we see that implemented? Requirements around EV charging stations for parking lots and things like that, trying to get those, you know, installed in more public and shared spaces. And we're trying to look at and incorporate a number of other ones to address a lot of the efforts that the city has done, you know, in the past and really wants to drive the community forward in the future, making sure that those are reflected from a zoning and a regulation standpoint. How can we better incentivize people, developers and others to pursue these sustainability efforts, whether it be, you know, new development in certain areas, or I think a bigger piece of it is going to be the redevelopment, is how can we almost take back some of the areas that, you know, have been parking or impervious or other things and bring them back into and help recover that for the community.
Yeah, if I could just add on that, because that's well said about the redevelopment. And Mr. Weaver actually took away some of my thunder a little bit, or my questions, because I was actually going to bring that up again. Well, and Mr. Greenberg is very passionate about this subject as well. Sustainability, restorative, and resiliency are concepts that are largely thought of as systems-based. Well, we'll just fix, you know, human interactions, or we'll have businesses do whatever or whatever. But to Logan's point is that you can actually hard code a lot of this stuff, especially the restorative. And I'm very happy to hear about all the other subjects. But then resiliency as well, it's about preparing for the future change of climatic conditions in the Great Lakes region. And what those are, you know, a lot of climate models actually show that we're going to get serious inundations of rainfall, but stretched apart. And how do we deal with that? And so you talked about the water. And please, for the love of everything, quit pushing into water to the streams. You know, make it go down. And then the other part of resiliency is making our buildings, our homes, you know, sorry, more resilient, but it's also about what we actually do with our human populations and about how we actually deal with those, especially in areas that might be sensitive, might be prone to flooding, might be prone to something else, because everything's changing in 50 years.
Yeah. How many times have we had a 100-year rain event in the last 5-7 years, right? It's like, I thought that was every once in 100 years. Now it's every year. Yeah, we're going to have to figure out what to do with that water. And like you said, yeah, it can't all go into a stream. It has to go somewhere. Impervious surfaces, they're not going to work. So we're going to have to figure that out. And I think that's a big part of what we're doing in this code, too, is to make sure that there are other surfaces, pervious surfaces, that are required. Yep.
I would just add from my perspective that Gahanna's current zoning code has extremely generous impervious, and like in our industrial areas, we don't have any maximum, which I've never seen before. So we're probably a little too generous in that sense because of some of the impacts that creates when you don't have those green spaces. So I think, we're trying to make things, easier in a lot of areas to do business, but again, we have to be smart about it, so it's not just carte blanche. And I think that's one of the changes we're gonna see from our current code to the proposed code, is that there will be some maximums now in areas of the city where historically there really haven't been, and those are areas that we're dealing with some challenges now because of that. So we're trying to be smarter on some of those things.
Yeah, thank you, but I haven't heard yet, and maybe you're gonna get to it, about the resiliency piece. Buildings must change and adapt to the changing in the climate. Is that something else that's actually being considered?
As far as building design or building materials,
Yes,
all that
yes.
sort of thing. I don't think we've really gotten into too much of that yet.
Not from a resiliency, and I'm not sure, because there's so many building codes and regulations on some things that's kind of like the walkability. There's a lot of different variations and variables there. That might be a citywide perspective. I think from an optics standpoint, where our code's lacking, except for Creekside, like we looked at, doesn't have consistency in materials and that. So if there are some preferred natural materials or materials that are, and I'm not an expert in that field, so I apologize, but that might get us closer to our goal of increasing our building resiliency. That's something we can talk about a little bit, but I'm cautious on that a little bit just because of building code standards and that, because those are all interrelated, and the vast majority of building codes state.
Understood.
But we can look at that.
So, building code, we design for a building to have a life cycle of 25 years. Europe is 100. So,
Amen.
yeah, it seems kind of odd that we're that transient on our structures. We build them, tear them down, and don't even think about it. So I don't think that's more of a building code question. Any answer? Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's something that I think, I know it maybe exceeds the scope of this conversation, but definitely weighs on my mind about construction, having a lot of new buildings that only have about a 21-year life cycle.
Yeah, looking at it, if we granted something like that, the character that Gahanna could have would be a leader in that possibility. Because you come in here and it's here, it's always going to be here, it's going to look like that, and the quality of life that you get with that, there's a lot of pluses with it, but outside the purview, so.
Yeah, and that, in Creekside, that's what we're talking about, are more permanent natural materials. I don't know what the inside of the construction's like, but at least the exterior would be more permanent than some type of, synthetic material or vinyl or something like that.
Yeah, I don't see any solar panels on the roof.
I don't either.
Just bringing that up.
Yes, sir.
But there are buildings with roof gardens on them to retain the water, so it doesn't run off. There are, so I don't know how you would incentivize a developer to do that, but that is and around their property as well, to suck up the water so it doesn't run off as much, and put in the impervious, not impervious, allow the water
Typically developers like, as we found developers like for incentives, whether it's inclusion of, we're trying to incentivize inclusion of some sustainable element to the building or affordable housing element or something like that. They usually like additional stories, additional units, and less parking. So, you may be able to use your parking minimums to your advantage if you want to try to incentivize something.
So there's trades.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I mean, you can, there's one of two ways, it's the carrot or the stick, right? Some communities out there, like, you have to do this, this, and this. We don't find that to be very popular in Ohio generally. We find that most Ohio communities are more about the incentive. How do we incentivize what we want rather than mandate it? But, we work all over the country, and some places are big on mandates, so.
Financial incentives can be tied to those types of things too, correct?
If you're participating in a public-private partnership or incentivizing something, tax, yes, tax abatements, things like that.
So if we were doing that, the city could require a sustainability plan for the property as part of the getting the public-private
Absolutely.
partnership.
If you were trading that for something else, yes.
John, would it be fair to say that if there was like a development agreement, the legal parameters around a development agreement is very different than typical zoning actions? So that would be the appropriate place, would be more of
Yeah.
a legislative action through like a development agreement, not tied to development approvals through.
Right. If there's a monetary
Something like
element that the city's contributing, a tax abatement or
That's my.
direct investment, then you have that development agreement. You can't contract zoning that way, but you
That
can
would be more
create incentives.
Policy-driven versus
Exactly.
code-driven.
Exactly. So,
Well, it could be driven by code through a CRA ordinance.
Yeah, but
Not so.
not within the context of, we're talking about zoning code right now, so I was referring to zoning code, right?
Now, we do things, we can do some things within zoning. For example, affordable housing units. If you provide X% of affordable housing units, you can get X number of additional units, things like that are automatic. Yeah, but, when the city's participating in the development, whether through tax abatement or a direct monetary investment, that's where you have the agreement and the ability to, trade.
This is probably not the thing that should be said, but we really have a community that we have lots of transportation people going through in the morning and in the evening. And how does that work then? How do we make sure that this is done? And I can't imagine with Intel that it's not going to get worse than that. And indeed, like Johnstown Road is, it'll have to be, somehow moved to a bigger place because they're coming through all the time.
Yeah.
Now, how does that, does that hurt anything of the things that we're attempting to do? But
Well, yeah, I mean,
I think it has, it's really, really going to be terrible.
the public realm has a big impact on the private realm, right? And vice versa. The private realm can really impact the public realm too. So that's going to be a conversation with your transportation folks and ODOT and whoever else, is to try to marry the two. Say, here's our vision for the community and here's what you need, and how do we make those two things work together? Yeah, so, but there are things you can do with the land use to soften those environments some, moving the building, locating the buildings closer to the street, creating greenways along those streets. We've actually proposed a corridor village concept that does that, that sort of allows the corridor to be what it is, which is a transportation artery, and then creates a walkable secondary transportation along these village areas along the corridors. And that's getting some traction. Instead of trying to convert the corridor into something it's not, sort of, working on the sides of it. It's a tough one, yeah. I mean, you're gonna have to work together.
I was going to say, it is a tough one, but one of the benefits to, like what Council President Renner brought up with multimodal is when you have, or like you said, Sean, about walkability doesn't mean like around the pond, it's going to places. When you introduce a mix of uses, that actually reduces the amount of trips per day typically seen in an area. So having a mix of uses does lessen the burden on infrastructure, specifically vehicular trips per day. So when you get into the analysis of how many trips, and the more isolated a use is, the more everyone's got to drive to it. So by incorporating a little bit of mix of uses in area, that's what we can control in Gahanna. That should help at least not rapidly increase the trips and amount of daily traffic on some of those roadways, because there'll be plenty of it coming in and out from other jurisdictions. But that's at least something we can do internally if that's something we want, like we talked about with mix of uses, having places that people want to go to.
Some of this is incremental change. It's not overnight, right? So like an ADU, that's an incremental change. Some of these changes that we're making it will take a long time to see the effects of them. You're sort of setting the regulatory table for what you want to see. And when that comes along, hopefully it reflects that vision, because the regulations are set that way.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you have multiple plans, codes that work together. So you're gonna have your zoning code and redefining what new districts, zones we're going to have. Then we have the active transportation plan that will help guide the areas where we're missing with sidewalks and trails and connectivity that way. We have the thoroughfare plan, which I believe we're going to be updating next year as well, that was done in 2019. And all of those things, I think, inform one another. And to your point, it's not an overnight fix. It's just the ability, being able for all of us to see how all of these lay out and then create that strategy going forward, how they all fit together. Am I missing anything?
Yep, that's exactly right.
I had one more little comment. Old Town. Is there anything in the code that's going to change the density of downtown Gahanna?
Yeah, I don't believe we're proposing anything to change the downtown density. So it's our old Gahanna mixed-use area, which is the predominant zoning around Mill Street, Granville Street. That is very developer-friendly. It doesn't have any like your typical height restrictions of, say, 50 feet or 3 stories. It's basically whatever the airport would allow. Parking's already reduced in that area. And so basically for residential, mixed use, commercial, those are all kind of allowed by right. That can be incorporated in vertically mixed uses, horizontally. It doesn't require a mix of uses. Reduced setbacks, reduced parking. Density is greater there than anywhere else in the city. If you can park it, you can build it from a density standpoint. That has been very well received by the development community, even though there hasn't been a lot of new development in that area, because there's some other challenges. But zoning hasn't been identified as one of them, so we wouldn't want to create an impediment to developing that area, because I think from all the engagement we've had, whether it's, it's been very consistent that that's the area that the community wants to see density and those mix of uses more than anywhere else.
Yes, sir.
One quick one that I haven't heard mentioned in terms of hot topics, short-term rentals.
Thank you.
Short-term rentals, yes. So are you having an issue with those?
I would love if you have a general trend. What is the hot trend? Is there a recommendation
My
for?
question, yeah. What are you seeing? And
I want to learn. That's what I'm
Yes,
doing.
okay. The hot trend is to be reducing them, to limit them, to regulate them. And that is because of the change, the impacts on the existing neighborhoods. It's gotten out of control in a lot of places. And so there are two ways to do that. It's generally done through a business licensing, some sort of business licensing, or where there's a maximum number of licenses per, whatever, if you have that. Zoning, I've seen with limited success. You could create a short-term rental use and then only allow it in certain places, but I think there have been some challenges to that around the country, interstate commerce challenges, things like that. So, yes.
Let me just weigh in a little bit kind of from a policy or sort of big picture concern. One of the big concerns I have is with the commoditization of housing and artificially driving up costs of homes.
Yes.
In Central Ohio, I'm sure you've heard about the subdivisions that are being constructed that are nothing but rental single-family homes.
Yes.
And while there is absolutely nothing wrong with rentals, the concern that I have is that it's not allowing middle-class access to one of the most important ways that middle-class families can build wealth when you're creating such a market for rental units. So that's the concern that I have from a bigger picture. And one of the reasons why I would be concerned about ensuring that we are being very mindful about that as a community.
Yes, it crowds out homeownership. It crowds out, single family housing, traditional single family housing opportunities, drives up prices. And so we're seeing some communities try to limit that as much as possible, but zoning isn't exactly how they're doing it. Yeah, they're doing it through other means.
So, to that point, and thank you, because I share your concern. I think, with people, you move into a single-family neighborhood, you're expecting to know your neighbor next door, not having 15 people one weekend and, different people rotating in and out, which is some of the complaints that we've received from residents. Have you seen any other communities, municipalities within the Columbus region? City of Columbus, I thought, implemented some short-term rental legislation, but have you seen any other communities maybe more akin to Gahanna's size that have taken that step forward?
I'd have to look back, but I think Westerville did something. You might want to check Westerville.
We got a Westerville planner over here who's grimacing.
No, I don't know. I thought they did something along those lines. I'm trying to think if any other community that we've worked with has done that.
Mr. Mako, do you
Mr.
want to say
Mako,
anything?
yes?
Come on, I'm going to with no comment.
That's allowed.
If I may, I actually was speaking to somebody today at the Ohio Municipal League Conference. She is on city council for Blue Ash, Ohio, and I believe she said that there are about 12 to 13,000 residents, and a few years ago they completely banned short-term rentals. She said that they do still have some they kind of pop up and it's kind of hard to control them, but she said that at the time the city attorney was very hesitant that they were going to be sued for doing that, and they have not yet, but just found that out today.
I do like the business licensing concept. I mean, I think that deserves some exploration.
Yeah, it's definitely easier to regulate the business side of it than the property rights side of it.
Right.
I'm familiar with Blue Ash, and I know the law director, so I get that.
Yeah, looks like we're right past 8 o'clock. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I'll talk, if it's all right, I'll just talk a little bit about next steps and where we go from here. I think there's a lot of good discussion and some elements here that staff is going to have to take a look at and look at our zoning code, see where we're at and see what direction we need to go. Some of these might be some long-term kind of things because there's some new initiatives and that's a little bit more in-depth nature, but the short timeline from here is, again, staff, we're going to be working with Sean and his team on the zoning map, incorporating some of the feedback we heard tonight. The goal is to have a draft document before Planning Commission at their November 1st meeting. Talk to you a little bit about that, let you digest that for a couple of weeks. Hopefully be back November 15th for a vote. Yeah, that's right. You know,
I thought we had an open house on November 1st.
Yeah, I'll cover that. So this is the public hearing, part of things. You go for
An
planning
initial draft,
commission.
an
with-
initial
yeah,
draft.
Yes, with the draft. We have, as the mayor was eagerly waiting, some additional engagement opportunities forthcoming. We'll be at the Columbus Business First breakfast this Friday at the library, 7 to 9. Come out there. We'll be there with our boards, much like the flea market, having a discussion with the business community. We have an open house here November 1st between 10 and noon, I believe. Again, we're really targeting our business community. We're inviting them to come out, talk to staff. We want to educate them on the zoning code and how that might affect a small business or prospective business. Go from there, and again, you know, making code updates as we go along. The goal is to get a document draft before council here before the end of the year, and hopefully before you for adoption again before the end of the year.
Certainly a draft before the end of the year. I would expect there'll be conversation in addition, well, we'll have public hearings when that's presented too.
Yeah, so public hearing before planning commission, that's part of the adoption process, and obviously with city council, there's public hearing and additional public opportunities, opportunities for the public to provide comment and feedback, and we'll keep revising that document as we need to be as reflective as possible of the community's vision.
2 months, budget season.
That's why I went.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's it.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you.